Hi friends, today I have a book haul for you. I have 16 books to share, which 16 is a lot for me. I've been accumulating these since the end of last year, but I was kind of looking through what I wanted my reading to look like this year, looking at my shelves, and noticing that I have a lot of classics that I haven't read. And I definitely have a comfort zone, like I mentioned in the Reading Shifts tag, that I feel most comfortable buying classics in physical format. And so what I wanted to do was kind of encourage myself and get myself excited to read more modern books, but also in buying modern books, because I've definitely developed my taste enough that I feel like I can feel more confident in my ability to choose books that I will end up enjoying. So that was kind of my thinking when I was choosing these books. And I have a mix of genres to talk about. So there's some modern classics, because I could use some more of those. Some historical fiction, literary fiction, and nonfiction. So I'm going to start with modern classics. And the first one is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which I picked up because I would really like to read through everything that Toni Morrison wrote. I already have Jazz and Beloved. I've only read Beloved, but I just like the idea of kind of periodically picking up more of her books. And I was excited when I saw that this was actually the first book that she wrote, because I kind of like the idea of, from now on, maybe reading them in the order that she wrote them, because I just feel like that's a cool way to experience an author's body of work, is in the order that they wrote them, to kind of see that progression through their career. So Pekala Breedlove, a young black girl, prays every day for beauty. Mocked by other children for the dark skin, curly hair, and brown eyes that set her apart, she yearns for the blonde hair and blue eyes that she believes will allow her to finally fit in. Yet as her dream grows more fervent, her life slowly starts to disintegrate in the face of adversity and strife. So I know that this is about racial self-contempt, and that Morrison really wanted to explore where that comes from, how that happens, and what it would do to specifically someone who is kind of the most vulnerable person that it could happen to, so a child. And in particular, a child that doesn't have the kind of character, support, or resources to kind of grow out of that self-contempt. And I would really like to read this really soon, I think. And then from here on out, reading the rest of her books in the order that she wrote them. Next, I have Satantango by László Krasznahorkai. And I picked this up kind of on a whim. I went into Barnes & Noble when they were having their big sale, and they had this on one of the big display tables at the front, and I just recognized the name. And I know that this has been adapted into a masterful movie by Bellatar, and that he worked on the screenplay with Krasznahorkai, and I would really like to watch that. It's very intimidating, though, the 7+ hour runtime. But I picked this up without necessarily knowing what it's about. The description is not very detailed, maybe? I don't know. The action of Satantango centers on the arrival of a man who may or may not be a prophet, or the devil, or a con artist, in a rotting, rain-drenched Hungarian hamlet infested with failures and spiders and drunks. But on Goodreads, they also say, at the center of Satantango is the eponymous drunken dance, referred to here sometimes as a tango. It takes place at the local inn where everyone is drunk. The world is rough and ready, lost somewhere between the comic and the tragic, in one small, insignificant corner of the cosmos. Theirs is the dance of death. And that just sounds kind of amazing. I still don't know what it's going to be about, but that's okay. From what I've seen, it sounds like this is a very fragmented kind of story, maybe experimental, maybe abstract, which I've really enjoyed, just letting those kinds of books happen, and enjoying that. I appreciate a book where an author trusts the reader to put in a little bit of work to get the most out of it. So yeah, I'm excited to have it in my collection. Next, I'm going to move on to historical fiction. And the first book is Clear by Carys Davies. And this one is set in 1843 on a remote island in Scotland. And there's only one inhabitant on the island, and he finds a minister passed out on the beach one day. And so he takes him home and tries to kind of help him recover, but they don't speak the same language. But they still sort of start to bond. And what the man from the island doesn't know is the minister was sent there to evict him. And then you also have the perspective of the wife of the minister on the mainland waiting for him to come home. And I'm very excited to read this because that sounds amazing. That sounds like a lot of tension. And I really enjoyed West by the same author, which is set, it's also historical, and it's set in America, in the US, while it was still being mapped out. And that was very good too. So I'm excited to check this one out as well. Next is Lives of Girls and Women by Alice Munro. And I know that she actually mostly wrote short stories. This is her one novel. But while I was looking at what was available from her at the bookstore, this one stood out to me just from the description. The only novel from Alice Munro, award-winning author of The Love of a Good Woman, is an insightful, honest book, autobiographical in form but not in fact, that chronicles a young girl's growing up in rural Ontario in the 1940s. Del Jordan lives out at the end of the Flats Road on her father's fox farm, where her most frequent companions are an eccentric bachelor family friend and her rough younger brother. When she begins spending more time in town, she is surrounded by women. Her mother, an agnostic, opinionated woman who sells encyclopedias to local farmers, her mother's boarder, the lusty Fern Doherty, and her best friend Naomi, with whom she shares the frustrations and unbridled glee of adolescence. Through these unwitting mentors and her own encounters with sex, birth, and death, Del explores the dark and bright sides of womanhood. All along, she remains a wise, witty observer and recorder of truths in small-town life. The result is a powerful, moving, and humorous demonstration of Alice Munro's unparalleled awareness of the lives of girls and women. And that just sounds very up my alley. And I just really also wanted to check out something by Alice Munro because I have seen that she is an influence on a lot of authors that I've enjoyed. So that was a big reason. So I'm excited to see where those connections are with these other authors that I've enjoyed. I think it's really interesting to try to track what your favorite authors' influences are and to check those out and expand kind of, your awareness of where this legacy in writing sort of comes from, I guess. Next is Human Acts by Hong Kong. And I've been really meaning to read more from Hong Kong because I have read The Vegetarian twice and really enjoyed that. So I finally picked this up and I've heard really good things about it. I know this one is historic, based on true events following a student uprising. In the midst of a violent student uprising in South Korea, a young boy named Dong-ho is shockingly killed. The story of this tragic episode unfolds in a sequence of interconnected chapters as the victims and the bereaved encountered suppression, denial, and the echoing agony of the massacre. From Dong-ho's best friend who meets his own fateful end, to an editor struggling against censorship, to a prisoner and a factory worker, each suffering from traumatic memories, and to Dong-ho's own grief-stricken mother. Their collective heartbreak and acts of hope tell the tale of a brutalized people in search of a voice. And I just really like that it's that kind of human side of things, that it shows the human perspective in these kinds of terrible moments in history. And actually, the translator, Deborah Smith, includes an introduction where she includes a little bit of context for those of us that are less informed about Korean history, and also notes on her translation, which I always love. I think it's very helpful and interesting to kind of keep certain things in mind about the translation when you're reading books that are translated. Next, I have another Hong Kong, and this one is Greek Lessons. This one is not historical. This one's fiction or literary fiction, which we're moving on to now. So this one is, the blurb says, in a classroom in Seoul, a young woman watches her Greek language teacher at the blackboard. She tries to speak, but has lost her voice. Her teacher finds himself drawn to the silent woman, while day by day he is losing his sight. Soon they discover a deeper bond. For her, in the space of just a few months, she has lost both her mother and the custody battle for her 9-year-old son. For him, it's the dislocation of growing up between Korea and Germany, being torn between two cultures and languages. Greek Lessons tells the story of two ordinary people brought together at a moment of private anguish, their voices intersecting with startling beauty as they move from darkness to light, from silence to expression. It is a tender love letter to human connection and a novel to awaken the senses, vividly conjuring what it means to be alive. So I haven't heard as much about this one. I feel like people don't talk about this one so much, but I don't know, just based on the description, it sounds very up my alley. So I'm excited to have this one too. Next is The Easy Life by Marguerite Duras, and I picked this up because I really wanted something else by Duras after having really enjoyed The Lover last year. And so I grabbed this, and then I was pleasantly surprised to learn that it was the second book she wrote. Again, just that new interest of reading authors maybe in the order that they wrote things. And this one follows Francine. Francine is a 25-year-old woman who already feels like life is passing her by. After witnessing a series of tragedies on her family farm, she alternates between intense grief and staggering boredom as she discovers a curious detachment in herself and inability to navigate the world as others do. Hoping to be cleansed of whatever ails her, she travels to the coast to visit the sea, but there she finds herself fully unraveling. Lying in the sun with her toes in the sand by day, while psychologically dissolving in her hotel room by night, she soon reaches the peak of her inner crisis and must grapple with whether and how she can take hold of her own existence. An extraordinary examination of a young woman's estrangement from the world, The Easy Life is a work of unsettling beauty and insight, and a bold, spellbinding journey into the depths of the human heart. So that sounds really good to me. So I think this will deal a lot with grief and loneliness, which is those are topics that I've been reading a lot about lately, and I am interested in, and I know that it's just going to be beautifully written because that's Duras. She writes very beautiful prose. Next, I have the 3 remaining books I have in the Lucy Barton or M. Gash series by Elizabeth Strout. I mentioned in my favorites of the year that I read the first 2. My Name is Lucy Barton and Anything is Possible. And those I think you could read out of order. It doesn't really matter because the first one is about Lucy Barton, and she's at the hospital where her mother visits her, and you get to know about her past and her upbringing through conversations that she has with her mother and also some of the people from her town. And Anything is Possible is interconnected short stories that center like the specific people from the town, and so you get to know them and a little bit more about the town itself. But then the remaining books I do think you kind of should read in order, it sounds like, because William and Lucy by the Sea are specifically about Lucy and her husband William, and then Tell Me Everything is a book where Lucy overlaps with characters from some other of Elizabeth Strout's books. So Bob Burgess, who is a lawyer, and Olive Kitteridge, who has her own series in the Strout universe. So this is like the ultimate fan book, Elizabeth Strout fan book, and I'm excited to get to it eventually. But yeah, so this way I can finish the series, and I'm actually really excited too because I found out that Elizabeth Strout has a new book in a new series coming out this year. I think maybe in March. I'm not sure, but that's kind of exciting. But I still have a lot of books of hers to get through, so, that's okay. I'll get through these first, probably. Next is White on White by Aysegul Savas. And this one I found pretty randomly, but the description just sounded so me, so up my alley that I just had to pick it up. And I've already read it. I really, really enjoyed it. And it follows a student who is conducting research for her PhD on art history in an unnamed city in Europe. And she's staying in this apartment that she is renting from a woman named Agnes. And the apartment has an upstairs that is a studio, and Agnes is a painter. And so while the protagonist is staying in the apartment, Agnes comes to stay in the studio space, and she'll be working on her painting. And really the story is all about getting to know Agnes and about her life. As we also learn about the research that the protagonist is conducting. But really, I think it's about the selves that we present to the world and what happens when those selves are not equipped to deal with the difficult things that can happen in life. And it's kind of deceptively simple because not a lot happens in it. It's a very quiet, contemplative kind of book. But it just is, it's very layered, and it tackles so many different topics. It talks about art, but also family and connection, empathy or lack of empathy, and the idea of uncovering what lies beneath a beautiful exterior. So yeah, I thought this was great, and I'm really excited because the author actually has like 3 or 4 more books that she has published, some more recent ones, so I'm very excited to check out more from her. So we're moving on to some nonfiction, and so I've got The Years by Annie Ernaux, and I've been meaning to read Annie Ernaux for years now. So I bought this as a way to try to give myself a push to finally do it. And so I know that this one is a memoir, as she usually writes, but a little bit different. The Years is a personal narrative of the period 1941 to 2006, told through the lens of memory, impressions, past and present, even projections into the future, photos, books, songs, radio, television, and decades of advertising, headlines, contrasted with intimate conflicts and writing notes from 6 decades of diaries. Local dialect, words of the times, slogans, brands, and names for the ever-proliferating objects are given voice here. The voice who recognizes the authors continually dissolves and reemerges. Ernaux makes the passage of time palpable. Time itself, inexorable, narrates its own course, consigning all other narrators to anonymity. A new kind of biography emerges, at once subjective and impersonal, private and collective. And it was interesting because by this point, she was already very well known. As it says here, in many ways, this was a departure, both an intimate memoir written by entire generations and a story of generations telling a very personal story. So yeah, definitely a more experimental take on a memoir, which sounds very interesting. I personally really enjoy when there are things in a book that I can kind of look further into, which I guess we'll see if if this is the kind of book that lends itself to that kind of thing or not. I'm excited to find out, and excited to finally read something by Annie Ernaux this year. And next, I have A Truce That Is Not Peace by Miriam Toews. And this one is a really recent release, but when I saw that Miriam Toews had a new book, I got so excited because I love her. So I actually got this as an ebook from the library, and I read it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I watched interviews with Miriam Toews, and I just kept feeling like, man, I want to reread at least some sections and maybe take notes or annotate. And I didn't really want to get a hardback, but I knew that the paperback probably won't come out for another year, and so I caved. But I really don't mind at all because I love this, and it's actually pretty compact for a hardback. But this is also a memoir-ish kind of book that sets out to answer the question, why do I write? And within the book, it's the premise is that this Mexican festival is asking her to answer the question, why do I write? But she has explained in interviews that is not a real festival. It's just a stand-in for, the many times that she has been asked by different, festivals, institutions, whatever, and also herself to answer this question. And she feels like she hasn't done a very good job of answering that question. And she feels like this doesn't really answer it either. But I kind of disagree, because I feel like it does answer it in a much more personal and meaningful way than a more straightforward answer would. So what this is sort of fragments that really come together to piece together the reason why she writes. So it's made up of letters, emails, fragments of memories, and also literary quotes that do that kind of work of creating a narrative for the story of her life, which is the reason why she writes. And there's something she does in here that reminds me of Deborah Levy, in that she'll have certain elements within certain sections, a certain scene that will reappear later and create these kind of links and really deepen the meaning of what she's getting at. And but that's the only way that I would compare it to Deborah Levy. I think Deborah Levy's style is very kind of precise and tight, and Miriam Toews in this is definitely a lot more chaotic. I think it definitely mimics the way that it feels so difficult in her mind to try to answer this question, and at times it sounds a little bit stream of consciousness. You're a little bit in her head with her. So very different tonally, but so in that way it's a bit also of an experimental memoir. It's through understanding her life experiences that you really come to understand why it is that writing is so important to her. And it really is very tied to her father and her sister's suicides. And so I do think that's important to know. There's a lot of talk of suicide in here because that's just something that is a big thing in Miriam Toews' life. And it's also tied to her mother, whom she talks a lot about in this book as well. And she's just such an incredible woman, really funny and so resilient and positive. She talks a lot about her family in this book. And her mother is probably where she gets her humor, which there's a lot of in here as well, because it makes sense, right? If there's a lot of darkness in your life, that's just part of your life, you kind of have to develop a strong sense of humor in order to sort of combat that, to survive. That humor balances some of the darkness in her life and also in the book. But yeah, I think this is a really wonderful book. And if it sounds interesting to you, then you should definitely check it out, even if you haven't read from her before. But it's probably not the best place to start with Miriam Toews, maybe. I would say either start with Women Talking, which is about a group of Mennonite women who get together to discuss what they want to do because they have been experiencing these attacks at night. Some of the men in their community have been drugging and attacking women and girls in their community, and they want to decide what it is that they're going to do about it, how they're going to respond. Or Fight Night, which is her latest book, I believe, which is 3 generations. You have a mom, a daughter, and a grandma. And we hear from the perspective of the daughter, who is 9 years old. And I think the standout character in that is definitely the grandma, who is heavily based on Miriam Toews' mother. And so probably tonally, that one would be the best one to pair with this. So start with one and then move on to the other, maybe. But yeah, I think this is great. And then the next book, Zero at the Bone, 50 Entries Against Despair by Christian Wyman, I actually picked up because of A Truce That Is Not Peace, because the title of the book comes from a quote by Christian Wyman. And so he is mentioned in the book, but Miriam Toews has also talked about him in interviews, and she mentions how he's a Christian writer, but he writes very thoughtfully about faith, but also grief and suffering. And the way that she described it was that he is not, writing trite sermons or kind of blind faith or optimism or anything like that. He is very honest. And it made me think of Marilynne Robinson, and I love Marilynne Robinson. And I actually already started it, and I'm really enjoying it so far. And it's a book that's a little bit hard to describe because it's a mix of different things. A blend of poetry, criticism, theology, and searing memoir. Zero at the Bone begins with Wyman's preoccupation with despair, and through 50 brief pieces, he unravels its seductive appeal. The book is studded with the poetry and prose of writers who inhabit Wyman's thoughts, and the voices of Wallace Stevens, Lucille Clifton, Emily Dickinson, and others join his own. At its heart and Wyman's, however, are his family, his young children, who ask their own invaluable questions, like, why are you a poet? I mean, why? His wife, and those he grew up with in West Texas. And so I've been really enjoying this. I've been taking my time, especially because of the poetry in this, because I have been very interested in just developing my own ability to analyze and get more out of poetry, taking the time to sit down and improve my ability to turn the words inside out, and I feel like it just takes a little bit of effort to learn your own way of enjoying poetry. So that's what I'm trying to do as kind of like a personal enrichment project, and I've been really enjoying that. I feel like it's the kind of book that, beyond the poetry, his writing is so thought-provoking and erudite. It just makes me think and think deeply. Like, for lack of a better phrase, it makes me use my brain, which feels very enjoyable. So yeah. And we're on to the last two, and they are both short essay collections. These are from 404 Inc., which is a Scottish indie publisher, which is sadly going to be closing this summer. But these little books, which they call Inklings, big ideas in pocket-sized books, are going to be picked up by Saraband, which is a UK indie publisher. And they'll have some of the books that they've already published available, and then they'll continue the brand as well. And these are really cool. So they each one has a central theme, and then each chapter is an essay that further kind of discusses or explores that central theme. So the first one is Revolutionary Desires, The Power of the Sex Scene by Xuanlin Tam. And I already read this one, and I really, really enjoyed it. I annotated it. And so like it says, this is arguing in favor of sex scenes in movies. And so it's not saying that all movies should have sex scenes or that unnecessary ones should be there at all. It's really talking about the power that sex scenes can have for, having a narrative purpose. They can really show a lot about a character and also deepen the messaging and the storytelling as well. And I think that they make really strong arguments for that with a lot of really good examples. And so they go into a lot of detail with the examples, and so there are spoilers in here, so that's just something to keep in mind. But I really enjoyed a lot of the discussion to do with culture, politics, and capitalism. It feels very current. It's very obvious that the author is very online, and so I just feel like it feels very relevant. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one a lot. And the last one is Happy Death Club, Essays on Death, Grief, and Bereavement Across Cultures by Naomi Westerman. And some of you will know that I have mentioned books by Caitlin Doughty in recent videos because she also talks a lot about death practices and also mortality and things like that. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh, hey, I can continue my thread of interest there. But this one kind of does a lot of different things. So it's part memoir, part meditation on the many faces of death, from sprinkling ashes across the globe to the power of horror movies, the complexities of engaging in true crime entertainment, and the vital communities of peer support groups. Happy Death Club is a frank, curious, and darkly humorous look at one person's journey through grief and what lies beyond. So yeah, I feel like it just sounds very up my alley. And also, just from this cover and the title, there's definitely going to be some dark humor in here. So it looks like a lot of fun. So that was the last book. I'm very excited for these, all the ones that I haven't read. And I would love to know if you are interested in any of these, or if you have read any of these. I would love to hear your thoughts on them. Or you can tell me what your favorite book of the year is so far. And yeah, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.